All right, so this is class number 26, and we're continuing with the philosophy of sport. And I assigned 4 chapters. Each chapter is about 10 pages, really more like 8 pages. And they all relate the Olympics, how the Olympics has been affected by the Enlightenment. So the view of health was Greek, but since then, the Olympics was revived during the Enlightenment in order to proclaim Western cultural superiority to the rest of the world. And it was affected by those thinkers, the world views of the Enlightenment. So we have Descartes, Kant, utilitarianism, and Karl Marx, among others. So that's what we're going to do. There's a chapter on each one. I think it fits really well with my class. So I appreciate that my friend Heather actually wrote the book and did so much work on this. All right, the Greek view of the psyche is that it's natural. It's activities of soul in accordance with virtue, and those capacities evolved as human community became more complex. Then we started, the capacity for pattern recognition started to kick in, and then understanding that we are the creature with that can understand patterns. But the patterns are out there in the world. And so we're constantly trying to mold our minds to the world out there so that we know what's out there and we can anticipate, and we can avoid, and we can predict, and all this stuff. We're trying to match what's in here with what's out there. And the psyche is an activity. You're engaging with the natural world, with other human beings. You're engaging in many different ways. You have many social networks. You have relationships based on inequality, based on equality, you name it. That's a full life. Now, Descartes, split mind and body. And so, okay, he separates mind from body. So if you remember, Descartes separated himself from everything, and he wanted just clear and distinct ideas. So his idea of God, his idea of himself, his idea of nothingness. And then from there, he just says, okay, I'm going to see the whole world through the filters of mathematics, Newtonian mechanics, split off. It looked at the natural world as if it were a machine. And that's Descartes. And that's what Heather says, that within sports, there is a culture of treating your body like a machine. And it was the development of all these machines that we have now that was the result of the Enlightenment, the exploitation of nature for human well-being. So we took natural resources and exploited them. So we have all these machines. And then the social engineering, like we can treat our bodies like machines. We can just have this social engineering program and get our bodies to absolute peak performance, right? Training is approached scientifically like the calculated turning of a high-tech machine. So Heather herself is sitting on this bicycle machine feeling like she's just an extension of the machine. And her legs are turning kind of like the gears in a machine. And she finally decided, okay, I've had my run, and I think I'm going to write about sports more generally, sports as a part of human health. Mm. Then there's the dumb jock myth about athletes, right? And that was not the Greek thing, right? The Greek thing was it's a kind of excellence. it's honored. But the dumb jock is that the trainers have all the science and the athlete is just passive, right? Do what you're told. And they don't think. Um, it's not the way sports should work. Athletes use a lot of creativity and calculation while they're actually playing. So this is really a perversion of the original idea, but it also is really for a trainer to exercise that much control or to claim to or try to, rather than just say, okay, the team, and this is a difference between coaches. Some coaches are much more top down. This is how you should run the play. And others are, okay, here's what we got. You can be creative on the field and or in the court, and you can play from there, right? Play with it, figure out what'll work best among yourselves. You make the judgment, but you have to constantly be deliberating, right? Adapting. In the Eastern tradition, there's no separation between mind and body, um, like martial arts. And those Eastern athletic forms have become popular in the US, but I think it's because they recognize the value of this, and the fact that the West doesn't have anything comparable. The physical body realizes its living spirit and vitality, its ultimate unity. So the Chinese one is much more holistic. So it's in a way more like the Greek than the modern Western view. A wise person recognizes the interconnectedness of all things. And again, that's not Cartesian. That's not Descartes. He separated things. Oh boy. All right. I don't know how that happened, but okay. Confucianism, there's ritual habituates the body and a mind to achieve proper orientation to the world. So Confucianism talks about the heaven unity, right? Relationships with people and the laws of heaven to integrate those with culture. The Western heritage of mind-body dualism has had a profound effect on sport. The separation of mental and physical education, the disconnection between sport and spirituality, and the emphasis on the scientific production of performance that views athletes as body objects rather than as persons. Also, lack of opportunities for women, the disabled, the less physically able men, focus on performance lead to drug abuse and eating disorders, obsessions with the body, and they ignore mind and spirit. So I think that should be pretty obvious, right? There always are these problems with, are they using drugs? And that's a complete breakdown of what the Olympics was originally about. It's not just about winning, and it's not just about performance. It's about integrity. It's about a flourishing life. Okay, so the next one is consequentialism. So that's the utilitarians. Um, as practiced today, sport is separated from civil society. Yeah, that's really important because the Olympics was the creation of a community, right? An international community, and people behave according to community standards. They basically are setting up a polis, a political community, the highest level of community. And you have music and you have reciting of Homer. That's all good, and it's all this higher order way of being. But that's not what happens today. Lots of times, behavior of the athletes or of the fans is really unacceptable, right? It'd be illegal outside of the sport event. Violence in football, fights in hockey. Yeah, it's such an offense. It's such a perversion of the original idea. It makes me sad, But I don't have to watch it, and I don't. But it just, how many people really know what a place sports could have in our culture, and then what has actually been happening, this corruption. The international nature of Olympic sports is that people just get this idea they're universal standards of justice and injustice. So, nobody's right because they're American. American exceptionalism. We're different. No, you know. Um, and then when Barry Bonds used steroids, people would say, well, do you remember Jeremy Bentham? He said, you're free to do what you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else. Well, wait a sec. Is he hurting somebody else? Well, he could say, I'm not hurting anybody else. Everybody else can choose whether to take steroids. The other side of it is, well, some people don't have enough money to stay on the steroid, but the other thing is it's not healthy. So you're risking your health. And and you shouldn't be forced to do that. So, it should be illegal. The consequences of the action for everyone involved. What leads to the greatest happiness for the most people? Everyone counting as one. Play is voluntary and free. So if you remember the chapter on Mill on liberty, freedom of thought and action is one of the greatest goods a community can provide. Genius thrives in an atmosphere of freedom. Is the choice to dope simply a matter of freedom? Mill would say, the only purpose for which power can be rightly exercised over any member of a community against his will is to prevent harm to others. All right, that's the same as Bentham. You can do what you want. The thing about Mill is he said it only applies to mature adults who like higher pleasures. And Bentham said, no, forget it. Uh, as long as I don't hurt somebody else. Well, here's the question. Freedom in sport and play depends on limitations and constraints. Each game has a lot of rules and restrictions and referees to enforce the rules. If doping were legal and those who use drugs won, others would be forced to use drugs, so they're not free, even if they don't want the side effects and health effects, right? So you're calculating the overall freedom and equality. And the overall, you should keep it illegal because, right, I'm free to use them. Well, no, other people are not free not to use them. So nobody should use them. Then it's a level playing field. So, okay, so the amateurism, if you remember, I don't know, there's a movie, The Chariots of Fire. And in Victorian England, which is when it was revived, it was considered amateur. There wasn't money because that would prevent the working class people from participating. And the athletes weren't paid, right? And they weren't supported economically. So a working class person would never be able to afford it. And so it was called amateur. But that was not a Greek value, right? The city-states invested, and if anybody was good, they paid for it. They paid to support them, and they got the training they need, whatever. There has been a rise of professionalism, and that isn't the same thing as the Greek. City-state will provide for your needs, but you're doing it for the city-state, for the honor of the city-state, and ultimately just for human excellence. The professionalism is personal economic benefit. The Greeks didn't subscribed to that, and the Victorians didn't. So now things are getting corrupted by capitalism. Guess what? And we talked, I mean, that was the Enlightenment, was sort of John Locke and what Karl Marx said. Well, what do you expect? You know, it's money, it's going to all end up being money. The qualities that make someone a good player are awareness, focus, courage, perseverance. It also makes a good thief, right? So you need to connect that with a valuable social good. That runs throughout Greek tragedy, Greek poetry, Greek art, Plato's dialogues. The smartest people, like Alcibiades, are capable of the greatest evil because they know how to calculate, focus, persevere. And yeah, so it's very important that those qualities get associated with justice, love of justice, and truth, which is why, cheating and doping, these things associate the qualities of a good player with somebody who doesn't care, right? Who wants money or fame or power. So instrumentalism, the unprofessional exploitation of sport for extrinsic purposes like wealth and fame, undermines the spirit of play and motivates taking steroids and other substances. So I hope you understand that, right? In the Greek model, it wasn't for wealth, it wasn't for personal wealth and fame and power. It was play, right? But the city-state supported you because it was pride, in your city-state. But also you take pride in fair competition, not cheating, playing fair, knowing if you won, you really won. So that's the chapter on utilitarianism. So I know students have opinions about that. But in the principle of happiness, the greatest happiness for the greatest number in a free society would require doping to be illegal. Okay, this is deontology. This is Kant, right? The chapter starts out with a fencing competition where there was two women fencers. One was from Israel, and her opponent refused to compete because of Israel's behavior. Which, yeah, it's not hard to figure that out because we're doing it all over again. So she was willing to lose because she wanted to make a political statement. She didn't cheat. She didn't break the rules. She didn't take drugs. No violence, no foul language. Should she be punished or sanctioned for politicizing the Olympics? Or should she be admired for being willing to lose to make a statement? All right, now what would Kant say? Kant says only act in such a way that you can always will that the maxim, the principle you're following, should become a universal law. Okay. All right, so fair play. What does fair play require? Well, you can't use an illegal foil. You can't take steroids. It's not a particular issue in this fencing, but there's lots of things you can't do because they violate the universal law. But what about refusing to compete? Could you will that anybody who really feels deeply about a political situation and is willing to lose to make a statement that could be a universal law, that you could have that. They would will that. They would think that was okay at the Olympics. So Kant, another principle, never treat humanity simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. So the argument there is that she is the woman who refused to play was treating the Israeli opponent as a means to her political statement. So the authorities who asked the woman who refused to forfeit her match treated her as a means to political ends rather than as an end in itself. All right, um, so she used her opponent as a means, and the people who asked her to forfeit the match treated her as a means to political ends. So people are just treating each other as a means, whereas everyone should treat another human being as an end in themselves. Okay? So I'm not fencing against an Israeli. I'm fencing against a human being with equal dignity and humanity as I have. So that this is a competition between two human beings. Their identity, where they live, should not determine, your behavior toward them. Everyone who plays a game ought to try to win and ought to want their opponent to also try to win. Winning is not the only and ultimate goal. Somebody loses, but everybody should try their best so that when you win, you know you really won. And also, so if you lose, you know somebody's better than you have to will to engage in the contest, using your own skills, challenging your opponent's skills in a genuine effort at victory. So that's where two free, equal, dignified human beings are engaged in a relationship where each one is going to promise to do their best and challenge the other one, and each of them learns a lot. They get better at what they do, and they learn about themselves, and they feel like the other person has done them a favor by challenging them, whether or not they won. Okay, the games test the competitor's ability to overcome the opponent's resistance. The standard should be excellence. Winning matters only insofar as it motivates the cultivation of noble qualities. So here's another example. Whenever there's a game, but especially something like the Super Bowl, people will comment and they'll say, was it a good game or not? And sometimes it wasn't a good game because actually the teams were not matched very well. But it's very disappointing when the team or teams underperform, when they just aren't playing to their ability. And then the fans, I think, get pretty annoyed because they at least wanted to watch a good game, right? They wanted to watch people with high level of skills actually exercising that high level of skill, right? And it's not satisfying when somebody says, yeah, that was a really bad Super Bowl in 2015, it's just a bad game, right? That matters to people. And sometimes, people will say, the quarterfinals was actually a much better game, that kind of thing. What about hydrodynamic swimsuits, right? Everyone who wore them won in 2008. Should they have been banned, right? Well, should they have, they were banned, right? So what if if not everybody could have one, definitely you'd have to ban them if some people can't afford them and the Olympic Committee doesn't provide for them. But what if everybody could have one, right? The point of swimming is not inefficiency, right? It's not, I can, I could swim across the pool faster than you. if you really wanted to get from one end of the pool to the other, you would run along the sidelines, jump back in the water and see, I got there faster than you. I mean, the whole point is you got this water and it resists, and you got this body and you're trying to get through the water quickly. It's a test of your strength. And when you put on these swimming suits, you're cheating. It's not testing your strength. It's finding out how much money you had to buy how many swimming suits or the best brand of swimming suit. Anyway, the inefficiencies embedded in the rules of sport are designed to bring out through challenging skills and virtues of an athlete, right? The point is to put some, resistance in front of you, and that challenges you. So yeah, the swimsuit makes no sense. Um, all right, so we should use rules or equipment to provide broader access to compensate for uncontrollable inequalities like height. But you shouldn't, put on a swimsuit so it makes it easier and there's less resistance. And, it's just like, that's not the point. Um, And I suppose, like with weightlifting or something, if somebody's particularly tall or short, maybe they have a a platform they stand on, or because their back will get wrecked if they don't have a good distance. But anyway, I don't know for sure, but I can see how you could compensate for these other inequalities that aren't due to your athletic ability. Um, but what about when in basketball people make deliberate fouls to stop the clock, or in baseball you have these intentional walks? What about stealing signs in baseball? It's not illegal, but it interferes with the game's test of the athlete's skills, right? Deliberately fouling. Okay, so it's not a test of the skills. It's actually the strategic part of playing a game, right? The strategy. So how much should it be just skills and how much strategy, and where do you draw the line, right? What about soccer? A penalty kick versus a red card when you're handling the ball or tackling the opponent near the goal, a certain goal versus a penalty kick. But if you add a red card, there's no benefit, right? So, yeah, I have to tell a story about my grandson. He had a penalty kick. I mean, there was a penalty kick, and they chose my grandson to kick it, and he missed it. Oh, and he cried and cried, because he had dedicated that kick to his grandpa, who was going to die in another week or 10 days. And he was just heading to Mexico to say goodbye, basically. And he was so distraught. But, it was very sweet. And, I don't think my grandson's going to forget that event, but he learned a lot, and it's about a lot more than whether you got the ball in the hoop. And it didn't make the difference in the game, which also helps. They they didn't lose the game because of that. As I recall, he assisted a goal soon after that, or his team got a goal soon after that, so that was good. But what about that penalty kick? And red card. The fair play principles are more than just rules, right? And this is true. It's about your character. It's about seeking excellence and balancing your desire to compete, your desire to win, with also the desire to play fair and the desire to conduct yourself well, right? You shouldn't It shouldn't be a corrupting influence on your character. Um, People choose to use the rule to have a good game, right? People are choosing these rules. There's legalistic strategizing. There's a willful ignorance of the ethos, spirit, or unwritten rule of the sport. It's motivated by a narrow focus on winning. Um, and some teams, develop a reputation for being pretty willing to cut corners or, test the envelope just to win. Um, the problem is when you have a double standard, it's sort of okay for your team to cheat or to push the envelope, but as soon as the other team does it, oh, you just, you know, go up in arms. So this is not this is not the original idea, and it's a corrupting influence. Um, and you hear about parents that are I don't know, there's a name for it, but they're always complaining about the ref, or they want their child's coach to be more aggressive or assertive or to push the bounds. That's terrible, right? Then, the whole point of sports is lost when you get those parents that put way too much of their concern into whether their child wins or is on a good team or plays well. It's the values are way out of sync, out of balance with the other values the parents should care about, which is being respectful, being kind, being generous, working hard academically, all those other things. Sports is supposed to be part of a good life, and it can really end up setting a standard for a bad life, winning at any cost. So you get into a business and you do the same thing, right? I mean, the same kind of, you and your competitor, and there's certain laws. Do you push the laws, or are you happy that there's certain laws and everybody's got to compete on a level table? And the focus is on creating a good product. And your opponent creates a good product, and then because they're there and they have that product, it inspires you to create a better product. That's the idea in business, but it can get corrupted in sports and in business in a lot of the same ways. So respect for the game, respect for capitalism as an economic system versus right now we've got a really, monopolies, uh, gaming the stock market. I mean, there's all these ways that basically rich people are cheating. Bribing politicians to make laws that really should be illegal. But because you've paid for their political campaigns, you can tell them what laws to make. So they basically make bad laws that make it so it's not a level playing field. And it's not really honest competition anymore. Um, yeah, that's as long as you can see there's analogies between those. And that's why keeping the values in the Olympics is important, because you should keep the values in the capitalist system, and you should keep the values in the political system. Political system is about creating a middle class. And when the rich who only want to get richer basically pay for political campaigns, and so the politicians are on their team, and then they play to win. And this is bad. Did they learn that back when they were in grade school or high school and did sports? Or was what they learned in sports antithetical to what they're doing as adults? It's something to think about. Um, Recognize other players as colleagues or co-strivers, right? Not obstacles. Is the same with citizens. Recognizing other people as citizens, you want to have a middle class. You want to treat people fairly, justly, and have a good life for everyone. Um, the athlete who respects the game wishes to play as well as possible against a worthy opponent, playing as well as possible. This means that you allow your opponent every opportunity, as defined by the game, to play his or her best. Versus psychological tactics such as trash talking, stalling, delaying play to interrupt the rhythm of the opponents. This happens in political events too. I mean, the peaceful transfer of power is supposed to be the same thing. You accept that you didn't win, and that until 4 years ago, that's how it was. All right, spoiling, intentionally walking, kicking the ball back to the goalkeeper, taking a knee to run out the clock in American football. It denies opponents the possibility of playing the game according to its spirit. Fair play requires application of moral principle to sport, versus the structure of sport gave rise to the ideal of fair play, which then became a part of social morality. That's right. So it started out with just playing, and then you develop social morality, and then you start developing some principles. And then once you have the principles, then you apply them to the way the game. So it's just a very dynamic process. Everyone should strive to win, respect the rules, not just follow them, and have an attitude of respect for the game and for your opponent. All right, so then she has a chapter on virtues and vices, which I had my Aristotle's virtues early on. So this is her way of doing it. So there is, what about the relationship between sport and moral development? Does athletic competition promote vice? That's what the data is saying. I mean, it's supposed to promote virtue, but the data is starting to say, whoops, competition leads to corruption, bribing, fixing matches. Sport as a social practice should create a community, develop honesty, justice, courage, integrity, and sportsmanship. And that's what I said about how the Greeks wanted it to be. It got corrupted in Greece too. There's a community ethos focused on physical excellence. Honesty versus boastful or self-deprecating is know thyself, right? Relationships, coaches, officials, opponents, coach, athlete are all based on truth. There's a kind of bonding. The referee, and the player, right? What should the relationship between the referee and the player? Deception, deceive opponents, or recognize in others a skill, right? Might makes right. Take advantage in any way possible to win versus justice as treating equals as equals and unequals as unequals. In theory, it should work. People participate based on merit. Everyone has a chance. The team that wins is best, and it gets the reward. There's a natural emotion of competition, desire to win, versus the moral expectations of justice, which is sportsmanship. Healthy competition versus the excessive desire to win corrupts a community, and it corrupts all the virtues. The purpose of training is the purpose of training to win or to be able to do your best. If it's to win, you want to play teams you know are worse than you, or you want to play better teams in order to learn and get better. Courage, you take the risk of losing, the risk of doing the wrong thing, the risk of getting public criticism, public accountability. In real life, you lose a game versus a job or a political contest. So you're practicing learning to be in the public eye, and it's good practice, right? You have to learn how to take public criticism. You learn, some people are always going to criticize, other people never criticize. Some people flatter you, some people, you just kind of learn what's it like to live in the public eye, which as an adult, that starts to happen. There's a mean between overconfidence and fear. You don't allow your emotion to cloud your judgment. You have the knowledge necessary to know what's best and the self-control to choose it. Is the goal um, is the goal lack of self-regard and not being preoccupied with the result, but doing your best? Okay. Is your goal to just win, and in spite of the fact that it implies you don't have a lot of respect for yourself? Uh, you'll do anything to get this result? Or are you just not focused on the result, but you want to do your best? You have respect for yourself. Hubris, there are teams that are overconfident and they engage in bravado. Violence and aggression, you want to prevent intentional harm or disabling a competitor. I mean, it can get really ugly. It takes courage to confront your fallibility by entering the contest and courage to explore the limits of your capabilities. The virtues apply to all of life, not to winning a game. Integrity, constancy, honesty, justice, courage, understanding your life and all of its activities as aimed at the highest good you know of at any given time. The reason for engaging in sports in any context should be the exercise of virtue. Does sport actually reward virtue? Student athletes, the trouble is sports is more important than academics. Does the system and those running it put students in a hard place, in a bad place? Or are the priorities decided by the student? So another thing my friend Heather did, she taught school for a long time, but she did start to see where the students were disengaged. Sometimes they just were disengaged in everything, but they would be overly preoccupied with sports, and sports started becoming more and more of a deal. And she decided she left teaching and went to Greece or to Rome, to Italy, to start a center for philosophy of sport and also just basic Greek, the study of Greek learning. And she has classes in Greek and seminars and, pretty amazing stuff. She started her own academic center. Um, all right. So what is the difference here is, what's your goal in life? Is it fame and fortune, or is it virtue? And so you can give your own examples in your post, but in Greek mythology, there's a character named Paris, and he's a young man. And Zeus gives him a golden apple. Now, the apple represents what is it that you are most passionate about, that you're going to structure your life around. And three women compete trying to get Paris to choose them. And so, and I tell my students, are you aware that you will be deeply affected by who you marry, who you're passionate about, because your mind will get molded as you live together. But also your same thing is, what are you living for? So Athena says, if you give me the apple, I will give you wisdom and virtue. And that would be if you marry somebody who is wise and virtuous and just, and you spend your life having conversations about what is just, what is wise, and you actually engage in activities. So you inspire each other to live a life of higher and higher levels of virtue and justice. And Hera says, if you give it to me, I'll give you power. And so that would be Hera follows her husband. So if you want to marry a guy with a big corporate career, or if you want to become, that's your goal. Um, or, it can be a woman. Her goal is to be a CEO or whatever. And her husband says, okay, I'll follow you in the career. I'll raise the kids. So if you give it to Hera, she gives you honor, right? But, you know, are you going to, cheat, lie, cheat, steal in order to keep being the CEO or in order to increase your sales? If it's fame and fortune and power just for its own sake, then you will. You'll lie, cheat, steal. Okay, Aphrodite says, if you give it to me, I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world. And that's about sex and pleasure. And if you want sex and pleasure, you will pursue wealth because you have to have wealth to keep getting your Botox shots or your liposuction or your breast implants, or for a guy, I mean, guys have all this stuff too. But in order to maintain sexual stimulation or attraction, it costs a lot of money. Um, so that's it. Like when it comes to the Olympics, why are people there? Are they there for wealth? Are they there for power or fame? Or are they there as a way of exercising virtue and justice, right? They want to meet people from all over the world. They want to develop this international perspective. They want to understand humanity, that we all have a common humanity. Everybody plays by the rules. Everybody does their best. But does the Olympics really promote international justice, wisdom? And, that's I mean, it's a question where, overall, there will always be things that happen at the Olympics. Some people will be exposed as having the wrong motives, and the debates will go on. But the point of having that standard, the Greek standard, is that you can recognize the patterns. They just are the same old patterns. And the Greeks corrupted the Olympics too. And they're the ones that developed it. They should have enough pride in their own cultural tradition, at least to not corrupt it. No. Nope. So there's, the struggle between good and evil goes on. But I do think that you should at least know that just winning in athletics is not the goal of life. Life is learning how to lead in justice, learning how to be a good leader, create a good institution, weave people together, create a polis, um, science, industry, all the other ways that you can contribute to human well-being is a higher order of interaction than creating a game and playing and winners and losers. It's play, right? Sports is play. It's not spudaios. It's not some of the serious activities of governing, of exercising expertise in a field where there's a lot at stake, like medicine or law. Okay, so, or teaching. So that's this one. We have one more in the sport book.